The pregnancy test sat on the marble bathroom counter like a tiny plastic oracle, its two pink lines delivering news that should have filled me with joy. Should have. Instead, I stared at it through the mirror while brushing my teeth, watching myself practice different ways to tell Jeremy. A smile, a casual mention over coffee, a dramatic reveal over dinner. I'd been carrying this secret for 3 days now, ever since Dr. Patterson's office had confirmed what I'd suspected. 3 days of touching my still flat stomach in meetings, of declining wine at client dinners, of feeling like I was glowing from the inside out. With this beautiful, terrifying truth, Jeremy would be home any minute from his business trip to Seattle. I'd planned everything perfectly: his favorite Thai takeout from the place on Michigan Avenue, candles on our dining table, the test wrapped in tissue paper like a gift. 6 years of marriage had taught me his rhythms, his preferences, his tells. I knew exactly how his face would transform when he realized what he was looking at. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of his key in the lock made my heart skip. I smoothed down my black theory dress, the one he'd bought me for my birthday last year, and checked my reflection one final time. My dark hair fell in waves past my shoulders, and my skin had that subtle luminescence that Naomi always said made me look like I was keeping secrets. Ava? Jeremy's voice carried through our Lincoln Park townhouse, tinged with exhaustion. In here? I called, emerging from the bathroom with what I hoped was a casual expression. How was Seattle? He stood in our bedroom doorway, still in his charcoal Tom Ford suit, his tie loosened around his neck. Jeremy had always been beautiful in that sharp, calculated way that made women do double takes on the street. Dark hair perfectly styled, jaw that could cut glass, eyes the color of storm clouds. But tonight, something was different. His usual warmth when he saw me was absent, replaced by something that made my stomach clench. Fine, he said, not moving. To kiss me. The Marcus deal is more complicated than we thought. I waited for him to ask about my week, about the doctor's appointment I'd mentioned before he left. Instead, he walked past me to our closet, already unbuttoning his shirt. Are you hungry? I tried again, following him. I got that pad thai you like, and I thought we could actually. Ava, we need to talk. The words hung in the air like a threat. Jeremy's voice had taken on that carefully modulated tone he used in board meetings, the one that meant he'd already made a decision and was simply managing the delivery. Okay, I said slowly, watching him hang up his jacket with mechanical precision. What about? He turned to face me, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his features. Regret? Sadness? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Downstairs, he said. This isn't a conversation for the bedroom. My legs felt unsteady as I followed him down the stairs, past the framed photos of our wedding day, our honeymoon in Tuscany, the life we'd built together. The Thai food sat cooling on the kitchen counter, the candles I'd lit casting dancing shadows across the walls. Jeremy loosened his tie completely, the Hermes one I'd given him for our 3rd anniversary, and leaned against the kitchen island. The distance between us suddenly felt oceanic. I want a divorce. 3 words, 4 syllables, one irrevocable fracture across the pristine surface of what I'd thought was our perfect marriage. I stared at my husband of 6 years, trying to reconcile the man before me with the one who had cried when I'd shown him the positive pregnancy test from 3 years ago, the one that had ended in miscarriage at 8 weeks, the one who had held me while I sobbed in this very kitchen, promising we'd try again when I was ready. You're joking, I said. But the perfectly composed expression on his face already gave me my answer. Jeremy was many things: ambitious, calculated, strategic, but never cruel. Until now, he placed his briefcase on our kitchen island, clicking it open with practiced precision. I've already spoken with Andrew. The papers will be ready next week. Andrew, our friend, our attorney, the same man who'd been the best man at our wedding, who'd toasted to our lifetime of happiness while tears streamed down his face. You spoke to Andrew before speaking to me about ending our marriage. The kitchen suddenly felt too large, too empty. The 12-foot ceilings to high, the custom cabinetry to perfect. Everything we'd chosen together now seemed like a showroom display, beautiful but ultimately hollow. Jeremy pulled out a folder and slid it across the marble countertop. This outlines the proposed division of assets. I'm being more than fair, Ava. You'll get the beach house in Saugatuck. I think that's generous, considering your contribution to our assets. My contribution? As if the 6 years I'd spent supporting his rise from associate to partner at the firm hadn't been contribution enough. As if the networking events I'd attended, the dinners I'd hosted for his colleagues, the way I'd rebuilt my entire life around his ambitions, as if none of that mattered. What about the baby, Jeremy? The words escaped before I could stop them. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Something flickered across his face, not regret, not sadness, but something closer to annoyance. I'll provide child support, of course. I'm not a monster. You could have fooled me. The words escaped before I could stop them, but I didn't regret them. He sighed, checking his Patek Philippe watch. Another gift from me. Let's not make this difficult, Ava. We both know this marriage has run its course. You want different things now. I want different things. I couldn't stop my voice from cracking. What do I want that's so incompatible with the life we built? The life we planned? You want to be a mother. I don't want to be a father. It's that simple. But you said. I stopped, remembering the conversation we'd had just 2 months ago. He'd brought up children unprompted, talking about converting the guest room into a nursery, about taking time off for family vacations. You changed your mind. You told me you were ready. Jeremy's expression remained maddeningly neutral. I was trying to make you happy. I thought I could adjust, but I can't. I won't. So you're leaving me because I'm pregnant? I'm leaving because we're incompatible. The pregnancy just makes it more obvious. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. How long have you been planning this, Jeremy? How long have you been sitting in meetings with Andrew, dividing up our life while I've been planning our future? Stephanie, he said suddenly, the name dropping into the conversation like a stone into still water. What? Stephanie? From the office. We've been involved. The world tilted. Stephanie Morrison, his 26-year-old assistant, the one he'd insisted on hiring despite her conspicuous lack of qualifications beyond a Cornell MBA and perfectly highlighted blonde hair, the one I'd invited to our Christmas party last year, where she'd hugged me and complimented the vintage Chanel dress my grandmother had left me. How clutch of you, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Your pregnant wife and your assistant. Did you come up with that all by yourself, or did you pull it from some midlife crisis handbook? Jeremy's jaw tightened. I didn't come here to be insulted, Ava. No, you came here to detonate our marriage while I'm carrying your child. Excuse me if I don't receive the news with grace and dignity. He looked away, his gaze landing on something behind me. I turned to see what had caught his attention, the ultrasound photo I'd left on the counter earlier that day, the one I'd been planning to show him over dinner. The tiny gray blob that was our future, our possibility, our hope. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw hesitation cross his face. I never wanted children, he said finally, not looking at me. That's not true. We talked about it for years, Jeremy. You changed your mind. You wept when I showed you the test 3 years ago. I was in shock then. I've had time to process it now. Process it? My hands were shaking now, and I pressed them flat against the marble countertop to steady myself. It's not a business setback, Jeremy. It's your child. He closed his briefcase with a definitive click. I'm staying at the Four Seasons until the papers are ready. You have my number if you need anything practical. Practical. As if any of this was practical. As if dissolving 6 years of marriage while I was pregnant was something to be managed with spreadsheets and asset allocations. Does she know? I asked as he turned to leave. He paused, one hand on the kitchen doorframe. Know what? Does Stephanie know about the Marcus deal? I kept my voice conversational, even as I watched his shoulders tense. The Marcus deal, the acquisition that would put Jeremy's firm on the map, the deal that had consumed the last 8 months of our lives with late nights, strategy sessions at our dining table, and endless revisions of presentations. That's none of her concern, he said carefully. Or yours anymore. I smiled thinly. You might want to check with Robert Marcus directly about that. Jeremy turned slowly, his expression shifting from dismissive to wary. What are you talking about? Robert and Diana invited us to dinner next week. Well, invited me specifically. They want to discuss the Children's Hospital wing the Marcus Foundation is funding. I ran my finger along the edge of the marble countertop. Did I forget to mention that Diana and I sit on the hospital board together? For the first time since entering our kitchen, Jeremy looked uncertain. Robert Marcus's technology empire was the acquisition target his firm had been circling for months, but the Marcus family was notoriously difficult to get close to. They were old money, suspicious of financial sharks and the partners who worked For them. You never mentioned knowing Diana Marcus personally, he said. You never asked. You were too busy with your assistant to pay attention to my charitable work. I picked up the ultrasound photo from the counter, studying the tiny form, floating in its dark universe. It's funny, isn't it? You're willing to destroy our marriage, abandon your child, betray 6 years of partnership, all for a woman who'll probably move on to the next partner who can advance her career. But I'm the one who's being unreasonable. Jeremy's face had gone pale. Ava, you can't what? Can't mention to Diana that my husband is having an affair? Can't tell her how you've been treating me? Can't let slip that the brilliant strategist behind the Marcus acquisition is actually having an ethical crisis at home? I was bluffing, of course. I would never use my friendship with Diana as a weapon. But Jeremy didn't know that. He only knew that his perfectly orchestrated exit was suddenly complicated by variables he hadn't accounted for. You're being irrational, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm being abandoned. There's a difference. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, and I could see him calculating, weighing his desire to escape against the potential damage to his career. Finally, he straightened his shoulders and met my eyes. This changes nothing, Ava. We're still getting divorced. I know, I said quietly, but at least now I know who I'm really married to. After he left, I stood in our kitchen for a long time, surrounded by the remnants of the life I'd thought we were building. The Thai food had gone cold, the candles had burned down to nothing, and the ultrasound photo in my hands felt like evidence of a future that would never exist. I thought about calling Naomi, my best friend from college who'd always seen through Jeremy's charm to the calculating man beneath. I thought about calling my mother, who'd never quite approved of Jeremy but had kept her concerns to herself. I thought about calling Dr. Patterson, who'd been so excited to deliver the news of a healthy pregnancy. Instead, I sat down at our kitchen table and cried. Not the pretty tears of movie heroines, but the ugly, wrenching sobs of a woman whose entire world had just collapsed. I cried for the marriage I'd believed in, for the father I'd thought Jeremy would be, for the naive woman I'd been just an hour ago. But mostly I cried for the baby I was carrying, the tiny life that would never know its father, that would grow up with the knowledge that it had been unwanted from the very beginning. The house felt enormous around me, every room echoing with memories of the life Jeremy and I had built together. The living room where we'd hosted dinner, parties, the bedroom where we'd made love, the guest room we'd talked about converting into a nursery. All of it felt like a museum now, a carefully curated display of a relationship that had been crumbling without my knowledge. I must have fallen asleep at the table, because I woke to sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows and the sound of my phone buzzing. For a moment, I thought it might be Jeremy, calling to tell me it had all been a terrible mistake. Instead, it was Naomi. Ava, I just saw Jeremy leaving the Four Seasons. Are you okay? I looked around the kitchen at the cold takeout containers and burned down candles, at the divorce papers still spread across the marble countertop. No, I said simply, I'm not okay at all. Within an hour, Naomi was at my door with a duffel bag and a box of tissues, her dark eyes blazing with the kind of righteous anger that had made her a formidable public defender. She took one look at me still in yesterday's dress, makeup streaked down my cheeks, hair a tangled mess, and pulled me into her arms. What the hell happened? She demanded, leading me to the couch. I told her everything. About the pregnancy, about Jeremy's cold delivery of the divorce news, about Stephanie. With each detail, Naomi's expression grew darker. That son of a bitch, she said when I finished. How long has he been planning this? I don't know. He said he'd already talked to Andrew, so I shrugged helplessly. And he just happened to mention his assistant? Just like that? He said her name like he was commenting on the weather, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Naomi stood up and began pacing, her mind working. I'd seen her like this in law school, when she was preparing for mock trials, analytical, methodical, relentless. This doesn't add up, Ava. Men don't just wake up one day and decide to blow up their marriages, especially not men like Jeremy, who calculate every move. She stopped pacing and looked at me. How long has he been acting differently? I thought about it. A few months maybe. He's been working late more often, traveling more. But he said, it was the Marcus deal, or it was Stephanie. The name hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on the divorce, on Jeremy's rejection of our baby, that I hadn't fully processed the affair. My husband, the man who'd promised to love and honor me, had been sleeping with another woman while I was carrying his child. I need to know how long, I said suddenly. Ava, what good will that do? It's over either way. I need to know if he was with her when I told him about the pregnancy. I need to know if he was lying in our bed thinking about her while I was making plans for our future. Naomi sank back down beside me. Okay, how do we find out? His iPad. He always leaves it charging in the kitchen, and he never changes his passwords. I felt sick even suggesting it. God, listen to me. I sound like some paranoid housewife. You sound like a woman who deserves the truth. We found the iPad exactly where Jeremy always left it, plugged in beside the coffee maker. His password was still our anniversary date, a detail that felt like another small betrayal. I scrolled through his messages, feeling like I was violating something sacred, even though he'd already violated everything sacred between us. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A text thread with Stephanie that went back for months. 4 months of good morning messages and late night calls. 4 months of hotel reservations and deleted emails. 4 months of my husband living a double life while I planned our future. The messages were intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. Not just sexual, but emotionally connected. They had inside jokes, shared memories, plans for a future that didn't include me. In one message from 3 weeks ago, Jeremy had written, "Can't wait to not have to hide anymore. Soon, soon." While I was buying prenatal vitamins and researching cribs, he was planning his escape. Jesus, Ava, I'm so sorry, Naomi said, reading over my shoulder, but I was fixated on one message in particular, sent the morning after I'd told Jeremy about the pregnancy. She told me last night, "This changes everything. We need to talk." Stephanie's response, "I'm ready when you are. Whatever you decide, I'm with you." He told her about the baby before he told me he wanted a divorce. I said, my voice hollow. They discussed it. They planned this together. Naomi's hand found mine. "We're calling a lawyer. Jeremy already has Andrew. Then we're getting you a better lawyer. Someone who'll make sure you get everything you deserve." I closed the iPad and set it back on the charger. I don't want his money, Naomi. I want my life back. I want to wake up tomorrow and not be married to a man who could do this to me. You will. But first, we're going to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. The next morning, I called in sick to work and made 2 appointments, one with Rebecca Chen, the divorce attorney Naomi had recommended, and one with Dr. Patterson to discuss my options. I couldn't think about the baby, not yet. Every time I touched my stomach, I thought about Jeremy's cold dismissal, about how he'd planned this betrayal while I was growing his child. Rebecca Chen was everything Andrew wasn't: sharp, aggressive, and completely on my side. She listened to my story with growing anger, taking notes on a legal pad. "The affair complicates things," she said when I finished. "In Illinois, adultery can be grounds for divorce, but more importantly, it can affect the division of assets, especially if he used marital funds for his relationship with this woman." "I don't care about the money," I said. "You should. You're pregnant, Ava. You're going to need resources, whether you raise this child alone or..." She paused delicately. "Whatever you decide to do." That afternoon, I sat in Dr. Patterson's office, staring at the same ultrasound machine that had shown me my baby's heartbeat just days ago. The paper crinkled beneath me as I shifted on the examination table. "I need to know my options," I said. Dr. Patterson had been my gynecologist for 5 years. She'd seen me through the miscarriage, through years of trying to conceive, through the joy of this pregnancy. Her face remained carefully neutral. "You're about 8 weeks along," she said. "Still very early. If you're considering termination, you have time to think about it." "How much time?" "In Illinois, you can have an abortion up to 24 weeks. But most women who choose that route do so much earlier. The longer you wait, the more complicated it becomes." I stared at the ultrasound printout in my hands. The baby was the size of a raspberry according to the pregnancy app I'd downloaded. A tiny cluster of cells that would become a person, a life, a future. "What would you do?" I asked. Dr. Patterson sat down across from me. "I can't make that decision for you, Ava. But I can tell you that whatever you choose, it should be about what's right for you and your circumstances. Not about anger or revenge or trying to hurt someone else. What if I don't know what's right?" "Then you wait until you do, but not too long." That evening, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Jeremy had destroyed our marriage just 2 weeks ago, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: possibility. The divorce papers were still spread across the counter where I'd left them, but they no longer felt like a death sentence. They felt like a beginning. I touched my stomach, now empty of the future I'd briefly imagined, and whispered a quiet goodbye to the life that wouldn't be, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude for the clarity the choice had given me. For the first time since Jeremy had walked out, I felt like myself again. Not Jeremy's wife, not a pregnant woman abandoned by her husband, not a victim of betrayal. Just Ava Reynolds, who was about to discover exactly who she could become when she stopped living her life for someone else. I picked up my phone and called Rebecca Chen. "I want to fight," I told her. "I want Jeremy to understand that walking away from me was the biggest mistake of his life." "Good," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It's about time." As I hung up, I realized that Jeremy had been right about one thing: this marriage had run its course. But not because we wanted different things. Because I had finally learned to want more than he was capable of giving. The woman he'd married would have begged him to come back, would have sacrificed her own dreams to save their relationship. But the woman he was divorcing, she was someone entirely new. Someone who knew her own worth, who made her own choices, who refused to shrink herself to fit into anyone else's vision of who she should be. Jeremy had no idea what he'd unleashed when he walked out that door, but he was about to find out. 3 days later, I returned to work for the first time since the separation. The office buzzed with its usual energy. Account executives rushing between meetings, creative directors gesturing wildly over campaign concepts. The perpetual hum of ambition that had drawn me to marketing in the first place. I'd been a senior brand strategist at Morrison and Associates for 4 years, ever since Jeremy and I had moved to Chicago. The firm handled major retail and lifestyle brands, and I'd built a reputation for understanding the psychology behind consumer choices. It was work that felt meaningful, work that used my mind in ways that hosting dinner parties for Jeremy's colleagues never had. But as I walked through the familiar hallways, I felt different, more present somehow, as if I'd been sleepwalking through my professional life and had suddenly awakened. Sarah Kim, one of the junior account managers, rushed over as I reached my office. "Thank God you're back. The Riverside Mall campaign is falling apart, and Marcus Chen is breathing down everyone's necks." Marcus Chen was our creative director, a brilliant but temperamental man who demanded perfection from his team. The Riverside Mall account was our biggest retail client, and their holiday campaign was supposed to launch in 3 weeks. "What's the problem?" I asked, settling into my desk chair and opening my laptop. The focus groups hated everything. The tagline tested terribly, the visuals feel generic, and the client is threatening to pull out if we don't turn it around by Friday. I pulled up the campaign materials on my screen. Sarah was right, everything felt safe, predictable, like a dozen other mall campaigns I'd seen. There was no emotional hook, no reason for consumers to care. "Who's the target demographic?" I asked. "Families with teenagers, middle to upper middle class, suburban." I studied the mock-ups for a moment, then grabbed a legal pad and started sketching. What if we're thinking about this wrong? What if instead of selling them the mall, we sell them the experience of connection? I don't follow. Teenagers don't want to shop with their parents. Parents worry about losing connection with their kids. But shopping, when done right, can be a bridge between generations. I turned the pad toward Sarah. What if the campaign isn't about the stores or the sales, but about the moments that happen in between? Sarah's eyes lit up. Like a mother and daughter trying on clothes together? Or a father teaching his son how to pick out a good suit? Or grandparents sharing ice cream with their grandkids while parents actually get to shop in peace? I was getting excited now, the ideas flowing faster than I could write them down. The tagline isn't about the mall at all. It's about the memories. Where memories meet, Sarah said suddenly. That's perfect. I stood up, energy coursing through me. Can you get Marcus and the team together in an hour? I want to pitch this while it's fresh. The conference room was packed when I walked in. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression skeptical. The rest of the team, account managers, copywriters, art directors, looked tired and defeated. "Ava," Marcus said with a nod, "Sarah says you have an idea that's going to save the Riverside account." I have an idea that's going to make them forget they ever doubted us, I said, moving to the whiteboard at the front of the room. I spent the next 30 minutes walking them through the concept, sketching out scenarios and taglines, building the emotional foundation that would make consumers choose Riverside over every other shopping option in their area. The room grew quieter as I talked, the defeated energy transforming into something electric. The beauty of this approach, I concluded, is that it's scalable. Every mall can adapt it to their community, their demographic, their unique selling points. We're not just selling a campaign, we're selling a brand philosophy. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the board covered with my sketches and notes. When can you have a full presentation ready? Tomorrow morning. Make it happen. As the team filed out, chattering excitedly about concept development and production timelines, Marcus lingered. Good work, Ava. This is exactly the kind of thinking that's going to take you places. Thank you. Is everything all right? You seem different, more focused. I thought about how to answer that. I'm going through some personal changes. I think they're helping me see my work more clearly. Marcus nodded. Sometimes life has to break us down before we can build ourselves back up stronger. I'm glad you're channeling that energy here. That evening, I worked late developing the presentation, losing myself in the creative process in a way I hadn't in months. When I finally looked up, the office was empty except for the cleaning crew. I felt energized rather than exhausted, as if I'd found a part of myself that had been missing. My phone buzzed with a text from Jeremy. Heard you were back at work. Hope you're doing well. I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it. Without responding, Jeremy no longer deserved real estate in my thoughts. Instead, I texted Naomi, working late but feeling amazing. I think I'm remembering who I used to be. Her response came immediately. You're not remembering who you used to be. You're discovering who you've always been. The presentation the next morning was a triumph. The client loved the concept. Marcus approved an expanded budget for production. And I found myself fielding calls from other departments wanting to collaborate on future projects. But it was the conversation with Elliot Marston that changed everything. I was packing up my materials when he appeared in the conference room doorway. Elliot was Morrison & Associates CEO, a man in his early 40s who commanded respect without demanding it. He was tall and lean, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see everything. I'd interacted with him only a handful of times in my 4 years at the firm, always in large meetings or company events. Ava, he said, stepping into the room. That was exceptional work. Thank you, Mr. Marston. Elliot, please, walk with me. We left the conference room together, heading toward the elevators. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. I've been watching your work for a while, Elliot said. As we walked, the emotional intelligence you bring to brand strategy is unusual. Most people in this business think about demographics and market share. You think about what makes people human. I think brands succeed when they understand what people really want, not just what they think they want. Exactly. He pressed the elevator button, then turned to face me. I'm putting together a special project team. High-profile clients, experimental approaches, significant creative freedom. I'd like you to lead it. My heart stopped. Lead it? As creative director. You'd report directly to me, have your own budget, your own team, complete autonomy over the creative process. The elevator arrived, but neither of us moved to get on. I'm flattered, but I don't have the experience you have. Exactly the experience I'm looking for. Traditional creative directors think in terms of campaigns and quarterly results. I need someone who thinks in terms of long-term brand evolution and emotional connection. I thought about Jeremy, about how he'd dismiss my work as just marketing, about how he'd never once asked about my ambitions or my goals beyond supporting his own. When would you need an answer? Elliot smiled, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from him. How about over dinner? Tomorrow night? We can discuss the details, and you can ask me all the questions I'm sure you have. Is that appropriate? Discussing business over dinner? It's entirely appropriate and entirely professional. His expression grew more serious. I heard about your divorce, Ava. I'm sorry you're going through that, but I want you to know that this offer has nothing to do with your personal situation. I've been considering this move for months, since the Reynolds campaign last spring. The Reynolds campaign, a small boutique hotel chain that I'd helped rebrand around the concept of authentic luxury. It had been one of my favorite projects, and apparently Elliot had been paying attention. Tomorrow night sounds perfect, I said. As the elevator doors closed behind him, I realized I was smiling for the first time in weeks. Not the careful, appropriate smile I'd perfected as Jeremy's wife, but something genuine and unguarded. I was still smiling when I got home to find Naomi in the kitchen, cooking what appeared to be an elaborate feast. What's all this? I asked. Celebration. Dinner. I figured after your first day back, you'd need comfort food. Actually, I need celebration food. I just got offered a promotion. Naomi dropped her wooden spoon. Tell me everything. I told her about the presentation, about Marcus's approval, about Elliot's unexpected offer. With each detail, her grin grew wider. Ava, this is incredible. This is exactly what you've been working toward. I know. It's terrifying and exciting. And I have no idea if I'm qualified. But you're going to say yes. I think I am. Tomorrow night, over dinner. Naomi's expression shifted slightly. Dinner? With the CEO? It's professional, Naomi. We're discussing the position. And what does Elliot Marston look like? I felt heat rise in my cheeks. It's not like that. I just got divorced. I'm not ready for anything like that. I didn't ask if you were ready. I asked what he looks like. I thought about Elliot's intelligent eyes, his quiet confidence, the way he'd really listened when I was talking about the campaign. He's attractive, I admitted, but that's not what this is about. Of course not, Naomi said, but she was smiling. This is about you finally getting the recognition you deserve. Everything else is just a bonus. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the day. For the first time since Jeremy had walked out, I felt like I had a future, worth looking forward to. Not because a man was offering me something, but because I'd earned something on my own merit. I thought about the baby I'd chosen not to have, about the woman I'd been just 3 weeks ago. That woman had defined herself by her relationships, by how well she supported other people's dreams. This woman, the one who'd presented a brilliant campaign and been offered a promotion, was someone entirely different. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was someone I was excited to get to know. Naomi and I sat on my couch with takeout from our favorite Indian restaurant, barely touching the food. The house felt different now, not like a home, but like a crime scene. Every room held memories of Jeremy, of the life we'd built that had turned out to be a lie. He texted me, I said, showing her my phone. He wants to meet for coffee tomorrow, to discuss things civilly. Naomi read the message with disgust. He's probably worried about the Marcus deal, about what you might say to Diana. Good. Let him worry. Are you going to meet him? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see him, to look him in the eye and demand explanations. But another part of me, the part that was slowly awakening to my own power, wanted to let him sweat. Yes, I said. Finally. But not because he asked. Because I need to tell him something. The next morning, I dressed carefully for our coffee meeting. Not the soft, feminine clothes Jeremy preferred, but a sharp black suit that made me feel armored. I chose the cafe, a small place in River North that I'd never been to with Jeremy, neutral territory where I could control the narrative. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall. He looked tired, older somehow, as if the weight of his decisions was finally catching up with him. Ava, he said, standing when he saw me. Thank you for coming. I sat down across from him without taking off my coat. What do you want, Jeremy? I want to make sure we can handle this divorce amicably. For both our sakes, amicably, I repeated. Like the way you handled telling me about it? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I know the timing wasn't ideal. The timing wasn't ideal? I leaned forward. Jeremy, you told me you wanted a divorce 3 hours after I was planning to tell you about the pregnancy. You've been having an affair for months. You discussed our baby with your mistress before you discussed it with me. What part of that strikes you as ideal timing? You read my messages. I read your messages. All of them. 4 months worth of planning this betrayal while I made doctor's appointments and researched prenatal vitamins. Jeremy's jaw tightened. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your wife, or was, until you decided to throw away 6 years of marriage for a woman who's young enough to be your daughter. Stephanie's 26. She's not a child. She's a child to me. And she's an employee, Jeremy. Your employee. Do you understand what that means for your career? For the firm? For the first time since I'd known him, Jeremy looked genuinely scared. You can't tell anyone about this. I can't, I smiled, and it felt like a weapon. Or what? You'll divorce me? You'll abandon our child? You'll ruin my life? You've already done all of that. Ava, please. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm being more reasonable than you deserve. I stood up, gathering my purse. But I want you to know something, Jeremy. I know who you really are now. Not the man I married, not the father I thought you'd be, but the coward who would rather blow up his family than deal with his own fears. I'm not a coward, you're a coward and a liar, and I'm done pretending otherwise. I walked out of the cafe without looking back, leaving Jeremy sitting alone at the table. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. That night, I called Dr. Patterson's office and scheduled an appointment for the following week. I wasn't ready to make a decision about the pregnancy, but I was ready to take control of my own life. Naomi found me in the kitchen when she got home from work, cooking dinner for the first time since Jeremy had left. You look different, she said. I feel different. Good different or bad different? I thought about it. Stronger different. Like I'm finally waking up from a dream I didn't know I was having. And Jeremy? Jeremy is about to learn that actions have consequences. And that the woman he married isn't the same woman he's divorcing. The appointment with Dr. Patterson was scheduled for Thursday morning. I spent the 3 days leading up to it in a strange state of suspension, not quite pregnant, not quite, not pregnant, somewhere in between worlds. Naomi had moved into the guest room temporarily, and her presence kept me from spiraling into the kind of paralysis that had defined the first week after Jeremy left. I hadn't told anyone else about the pregnancy. Not my mother, who would have opinions about everything from the divorce to my reproductive choices. Not my colleagues, who would undoubtedly gossip about the timing. Not even my therapist, though I'd been meaning to schedule an appointment with Dr. Ho for months. Instead, I found myself having conversations with the baby, if it could be called that, at 8 weeks. Quiet talks while I lay in bed at night, my hand resting on my still flat stomach. Your father doesn't want you, I would whisper into the darkness. But that doesn't mean you're not wanted. It just means he's not the man I thought he was. But even as I said the words, I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Could I raise a child alone? Did I want to? Would I look at this baby every day and see Jeremy's face, remember his betrayal, relive the worst period of my life? On Wednesday evening, I finally called Dr. Miriam Ho. I'd been seeing her on and off for 3 years, first for anxiety related to my job, then for the depression that had followed my miscarriage. Her office was warm and comfortable, filled with plants and soft lighting that made difficult conversations feel possible. Ava, she said when I called, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. How are you holding up? I'm not sure I am holding up, I admitted. Can I see you tomorrow? Before I have to make a decision I'm not sure I'm ready to make? Of course, I'll move some things around. Can you come in at 10? That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the conversation with Jeremy in the cafe, about the way he'd looked when I'd confronted him about the affair. There had been no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused, just concern about his reputation, his career, his future with Stephanie. I thought about calling him, about trying one more time to reach the man I'd married. But that man was gone if he'd ever existed at all. The Jeremy I'd fallen in love with had been a performance, a carefully crafted persona designed to get what he wanted. The real Jeremy was the one who could plan a betrayal for months, who could abandon his pregnant wife without a second thought. Dr. Ho's office was exactly as I remembered it, bookshelves lined with psychology texts, a comfortable couch facing 2 chairs, tissues strategically placed on every surface. She was a small woman in her 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the sort of calm presence that made you want to tell her everything. Tell me what's happened, she said simply. I told her about the pregnancy, about Jeremy's departure, about the affair. I told her about the divorce papers and the coffee meeting and the way I'd felt like I was living someone else's life for the past week. And now you're considering terminating the pregnancy, she said when I finished. I don't know what I'm considering. I know I should want this baby. I know I should be angry enough at Jeremy to raise his child just to spite him. But I'm not sure I want to be a mother under these circumstances. What would ideal circumstances look like to you? I thought about it. A partner who wanted the baby as much as I did. Financial stability. Emotional stability. A support system that extended beyond just me. And do you have any of those things now? I have financial stability. I have Naomi. I have a job I'm good at. I paused. But I don't have a partner. And I don't know if I have the emotional stability to be a good mother while I'm going through a divorce. Dr. Ho nodded. What does your gut tell you? My gut tells me that I'm not ready, that I love the idea of this baby, but I'm not sure I love the reality of raising a child alone while Jeremy starts his new life with Stephanie. And what does your heart tell you? I started to cry. Then, the tears I'd been holding back for days. My heart tells me that I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people want. Jeremy wanted me to be the perfect wife, so I was. He wanted me to support his career, so I did. He wanted me to host dinner parties and look good at company events, so I did all of that. And now he wants me to disappear quietly while he starts over with someone else. What do you want? I want to make a choice that's mine, not Jeremy's, not society's, not anyone else's. Mine. Dr. Ho leaned forward. And what choice feels like yours? I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, at the city where I'd built my career and my life. I want to not be pregnant, I said quietly. I want to heal from this betrayal. I want to figure out who I am when I'm not Jeremy's wife. And I want to do all of that without having to explain to a child why their father didn't want them. That's a valid choice, Ava. It's your choice. But what if I regret it? What if this is my only chance to have a baby? You're 32 years old, and you've already proven you can get pregnant. This isn't your only chance, but even if it were, that's not a reason to have a child you're not ready for. After the session, I walked through Lincoln Park, past the zoo and the conservatory, past the joggers and dog walkers living their normal lives. The October air was crisp, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. I felt clearer than I had in weeks, as if talking through my decision had lifted a weight I didn't know I was carrying. I stopped at a bench overlooking the lake and called Dr. Patterson's office to confirm my appointment. Not to discuss options this time, but to schedule a procedure. Are you sure? The nurse asked gently. Yes, I said, and for the first time in days I meant it. I'm sure. The procedure was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I took Monday off, work ostensibly to prepare, but really to give myself time to process what I was about to do. Naomi had offered to come with me, but I needed to do this alone. On Monday evening, Jeremy called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Ava, I've been thinking about what you said at the caf. Have you? I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but we can get through this divorce without destroying each other. For the baby's sake. I was quiet for a long moment. Jeremy, I'm not having the baby. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. What do you mean? I mean I'm terminating the pregnancy. Tomorrow? You can't do that. I can, and I am. It's my body, my choice, my life, but it's my baby too. No, it's not. You made it very clear that you don't want children. You don't want me. You don't want the life we built together. So I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. Ava, please, don't do this out of spite. I'm not doing it out of spite. I'm doing it because I deserve better than raising a child alone while you play house with your assistant. I'm doing it because I want to be a mother someday, but not like this, not with you. We can work something out. Shared custody, child support. Jeremy, stop. You walked away from this marriage, from me, from our future. You don't get to have opinions about what I do with my body now. I never meant for it to happen like this, but it did happen like this. You made sure of that. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Not happiness, not relief, but a deep, quiet certainty that I was making the right choice. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since the divorce. I wrote about the baby I would never have, about the marriage that had ended, about the woman I was becoming. I wrote about choice and agency and the difference between being wanted and being needed. I wrote until my hand cramped, until I'd emptied myself of words and fears and regrets. And then I closed the journal and went to sleep, ready to wake up the next day and choose myself. The clinic was quiet and professional, nothing like the protesters I'd imagined. The staff was kind, the procedure was quick, and by Tuesday afternoon, I was home with Naomi, watching old movies and eating ice cream. How do you feel? She asked. Empty, I said, and then corrected myself. No, not empty. Lighter, like I've finally put down something I was carrying that wasn't mine to carry. Any regrets? I thought about it honestly. No, not about this. I'll probably have regrets about the marriage, about trusting Jeremy, about not seeing who he really was, but not about this choice. That evening, morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Millbrook as Sarah made her way to the town square. The events of the previous night had left her mind racing, filled with questions that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. The mysterious woman's words echoed in her thoughts. The time has come for you to understand your true heritage. As she approached the fountain at the center of the square, Sarah noticed an unusual stillness in the air. The usual chatter of merchants setting up their stalls was absent, replaced by an almost palpable tension that made her skin prickle. A few townspeople moved about their business, but their movements seemed hurried, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon, as if expecting something ominous to appear. Sarah, a familiar voice called out from behind her. She turned to see Thomas, the baker's son, jogging toward her with an expression of concern etched across his weathered face. Thank goodness I found you. Something strange is happening in the old quarter. Thomas had been her childhood friend, one of the few people in Millbrook who had never looked at her with suspicion or fear. His family had always been kind to her, despite the whispered rumors about her unusual abilities. Now, as he approached, she could see genuine worry in his brown eyes. What kind of strange? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The animals, Thomas said, catching his breath. They're all acting peculiar. The horses won't leave their stables, the dogs are howling, and the cats have all disappeared entirely. My father says it reminds him of the stories his grandfather used to tell about the old days, before the Great Silence. Sarah's heart quickened. The Great Silence was a period in Millbrook's history that was rarely discussed openly, a time when the town's connection to the ancient ways had been severed. Most people considered it nothing more than folklore, but Sarah had always sensed there was more truth to those old stories than anyone wanted to admit. There's something else, Thomas continued, lowering his voice. Mrs. Henderson saw lights in the abandoned tower last night, moving lights, as if someone was up there with lanterns. But you know as well as I do that place has been sealed for decades. The abandoned tower stood on the outskirts of town, a crumbling remnant of a bygone era. Local legend claimed it had once been a place of learning, where scholars studied the mysteries of the natural world. But it had been empty for as long as anyone could remember, its doors barred and its windows boarded shut. We should investigate, Sarah said, though a part of her dreaded what they might find. Thomas nodded, but she could see the apprehension in his posture. I was hoping you'd say that. If anyone can make sense of what's happening, it's you. They made their way through the winding streets, past the familiar shops and houses that had formed the backdrop of Sarah's entire life. As they walked, she noticed more signs of the strange disturbance that seemed to have settled over the town. Windows that were normally open were shuttered tight, and the few people they encountered spoke in hushed tones, casting nervous glances at the sky. The tower loomed ahead of them, its stone walls dark against the morning light. As they approached, Sarah could feel a familiar tingling in her fingertips, the same sensation she experienced whenever she was near something touched by the old magic. The feeling grew stronger with each step, until it became almost overwhelming. Look, Thomas whispered, pointing toward the base of the tower. Sarah followed his gaze and saw them, footprints in the soft earth, fresh and clearly recent. But these weren't ordinary footprints. They seemed to shimmer slightly, as if they were made of something more than mere dirt and moisture. Someone was definitely here, she murmured, kneeling to examine the tracks more closely. As her fingers hovered over one of the prints, she felt a jolt of recognition. The energy signature was familiar, though she couldn't quite place where she had encountered it before. A sound from above made them both look up. One of the boarded windows on the tower's upper level was slightly ajar, and through the gap, they could see a faint, pulsing light. We need to get inside, Sarah said, standing and dusting off her hands. Thomas looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. The door has been sealed with iron bands. No one's been able to open it for years. Sarah smiled grimly. Then, it's a good thing I'm not like everyone else. She approached the heavy wooden door, its surface scarred by time and weather. The iron bands that held it shut were thick and rust-stained, but as Sarah placed her palms against the metal, she could feel the power within her responding to the challenge. The metal began to warm under her touch, and she could sense the molecular structure of the iron beginning to change. This was dangerous territory, using her abilities so openly, but something told her that the time for hiding was coming to an end. With a grinding sound that echoed through the morning air, the iron bands began to bend and twist, until finally they snapped apart entirely. The door swung open with a creak that seemed to come from the very bones of the ancient structure. "How did you?" Thomas began, but Sarah was already stepping through the doorway. The interior of the tower was bathed in a soft, blue-green light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Dust motes danced in the air, and the smell of old books and forgotten knowledge filled their nostrils. A spiral staircase wound upward along the curved wall, disappearing into the shadows above. "It's beautiful," Thomas breathed, his fear momentarily forgotten in the face of such wonder. Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on something else. She could feel a presence in the tower, something ancient and powerful that was slowly awakening after a long slumber. The sensation was both thrilling and terrifying. They began to climb the staircase, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. As they ascended, Sarah noticed that the walls were covered with symbols and diagrams that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. The knowledge contained in these markings was calling to her, offering answers to questions she had carried her entire life. Halfway up the tower, they encountered the first of the books. Ancient tomes lined shelves that had been carved directly into the stone walls, their leather bindings cracked with age but still intact. Sarah ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles in languages she somehow understood despite never having learned them. Chronicles of the Elemental Guardians, she read aloud from one particularly thick volume. The Binding of the Ancient Powers, the Prophecy of the Chosen One. Thomas was examining a different shelf, his eyes wide with amazement. "Sarah, look at this." He had opened a book to a page covered with detailed illustrations of people performing feats that could only be described as magic. "They look like you." Sarah joined him and gasped. The figures in the illustrations did indeed resemble her, with the same dark hair and piercing eyes. But more than that, they were demonstrating abilities that she recognized from her own experiences controlling the elements, healing wounds, communicating with nature itself. "These are my ancestors," she whispered, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. "The woman from last night, she was telling the truth. I'm part of something much larger than I ever imagined." They continued up the stairs, the light growing brighter with each step. Finally, they reached the top chamber, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The room was circular, with tall windows that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. But it was what occupied the center of the space that truly captured her attention. A crystal formation rose from the floor, pulsing with the same blue-green light that illuminated the entire tower. Around it, arranged in a careful pattern, were more books, scrolls, and artifacts that seemed to hum with contained power. And standing beside the crystal, as if she had been waiting for them, was the mysterious woman from the forest. "Welcome, Sarah," the woman said, her voice carrying the same melodious quality that had captivated Sarah in the forest. "I am Lyara, and I have been waiting a very long time for you to find your way here." Thomas stepped protectively in front of Sarah, his body tense with suspicion. "Who are you? What do you want with her?" Lyara smiled, but there was sadness in her expression. "I am what Sarah will become, young Thomas. I am her guide, her teacher, and if fate allows it, her salvation." Sarah moved around Thomas, drawn by a force she couldn't resist. "You said something about my heritage, about understanding who I really am." "Indeed," Lyara nodded, gesturing toward the crystal formation. "This is the heart of Millbrook, the source of all the magic that once flowed through this land. Your family, Sarah, were its guardians for generations. They were the bridge between the human world and the realm of elemental forces." The crystal pulsed brighter as Sarah approached, and she could feel its energy resonating with something deep within her own being. "But if that's true, why don't I remember? Why has everyone forgotten?" Lyara's expression grew grave. "Because 25 years ago, your parents made a terrible sacrifice. A darkness was rising, something that threatened not just Millbrook, but the entire balance between the worlds. To stop it, they performed a great binding spell, sealing away the magic and erasing the memories of all who lived here, my parents." Sarah whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "They're really gone, aren't they?" "They gave their lives to save everyone they loved," Lyara said gently, "but their sacrifice was not in vain. The spell they cast was designed to last only until you came of age, until you were strong enough to take up the mantle they left behind. Thomas, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally found his voice. Are you saying that all those stories about the old days, the magic and the guardians, they're all true? Every word, Lyra confirmed. And now the spell is weakening. The darkness that your parents fought is stirring again, and this time, there will be no second chances. Sarah must embrace her destiny, or everything they died to protect will be lost. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was being told. Her entire life, everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in the world, was being turned upside down. I don't know if I'm strong enough, she admitted. I can barely control what I can do now. Lyra reached out and touched Sarah's shoulder, and immediately a sense of calm washed over her. Strength is not about power, child. It's about understanding your purpose and having the courage to fulfill it. Your parents saw great potential in you, potential that has been growing stronger with each passing year. She led Sarah to a section of the chamber where several ancient texts lay open on a carved stone table. These are the chronicles of your lineage, the history of the guardians of Millbrook. Each generation has faced its own challenges, its own darkness to overcome. But they all shared one thing in common. They understood that their gifts were not meant for personal gain, but for the protection of all living things. As Sarah looked at the pages, the symbols and text seemed to rearrange themselves, becoming readable in a language she somehow understood. She saw stories of her ancestors, women and men who had stood against natural disasters, who had healed plagues, who had maintained the delicate balance between the human and natural worlds. There's so much to learn, she said, feeling daunted by the vast knowledge contained in the chamber, and we have very little time, Lyra replied. The signs are already beginning to manifest. The animals sense it. The very earth itself is responding to the approaching threat. The binding spell will fail completely within the next few days. Thomas had been exploring the chamber, examining the various artifacts and books. What exactly is this darkness you keep talking about? What are we up against? Lyra's expression darkened. Its name is Malachar, and it is ancient beyond measure. It feeds on chaos and destruction, growing stronger with each act of violence and hatred. 25 years ago, it nearly broke through into our world, but your parents' sacrifice created a barrier that has held it at bay. But now the barrier is failing, Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. Yes, and when it falls, Malachar will return with a vengeance. It will seek to corrupt everything it touches, turning the very forces of nature against humanity. The only thing that can stop it is a guardian who has fully embraced their power and their responsibility. Sarah looked around the chamber, taking in the centuries of accumulated knowledge and wisdom. How do I become that guardian? How do I learn everything I need to know in just a few days? Lyra smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw hope in her eyes. You won't be learning it, child. You'll be remembering it. The knowledge is already within you, passed down through your bloodline. The crystal will help you unlock it. She gestured toward the heart of Millbrook, which was now pulsing with an almost rhythmic intensity. But I must warn you, the process is not without risk. When you touch the crystal, you will experience the memories of all who came before you. You will feel their joys and their sorrows, their triumphs and their failures. Some have been overwhelmed by the experience. Sarah looked at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly, despite his obvious fear. Then she turned back to Lyra. What happens if I fail? What happens if I'm not strong enough? Then Malachar will succeed in breaking through, and the world as we know it will end. But I don't believe that will happen. Your parents chose well when they decided to trust in you. Taking a deep breath, Sarah approached the crystal. As she drew near, she could feel its energy calling to her, promising answers to questions she had carried her entire life. The surface of the crystal was smooth and warm to the touch, and as she placed her palms against it, the world around her began to change. The moment Sarah's hands made contact with the crystal, the chamber around her dissolved into a swirling vortex of light and sensation. She felt herself being pulled into a vast network of memories, experiences, and knowledge that stretched back through generations of her family line. The first memory that came to her was of her parents on the night of her birth. She saw her mother, exhausted but radiant, holding a newborn Sarah while her father stood watch by the window. The room was filled with the same blue-green light that now emanated from the crystal, and Sarah could see protective symbols glowing faintly on the walls. "She's beautiful, Elena," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can already sense the power within her. It's stronger than anything we've seen before." Her mother smiled, stroking the baby's cheek. "Then we must be sure she's ready. When the time comes." "The darkness is growing stronger, Marcus. I can feel it pressing against the barriers." The memory shifted, and Sarah found herself witnessing the final battle between her parents and the entity known as Malachar. She watched in horror as the creature of shadow and malice pressed its attack, its very presence causing the earth to crack and the sky to darken. Her parents fought with everything they had, wielding elemental forces with a skill and power that took Sarah's breath away. "Elena, the binding spell," her father shouted over the roar of supernatural wind. "We have to cast it now." "But Marcus, if we do this, will I know?" he replied, his eyes filled with love and determination. "But it's the only way to protect her, to protect everyone." Sarah watched as her parents joined hands, their combined power creating a barrier of pure light that pushed back against the darkness. She could see the strain on their faces, the terrible cost of what they were doing. As the spell reached its climax, both of them began to fade, their life force being consumed by the magic they were wielding. "Tell her," her mother whispered as she began to disappear. "Tell her we love her, and that we believe in her." The memory dissolved, and Sarah found herself experiencing the lives of her ancestors. She saw her great-grandmother Amara, who had stopped a plague that threatened to wipe out half the kingdom. She felt the determination of her great-great-grandfather, Theron, who had stood against an army of invaders using nothing but his connection to the natural world. Each memory brought with it not just the experiences of her ancestors, but their knowledge and abilities as well. Sarah could feel techniques and spells embedding themselves in her mind, ancient wisdom becoming part of her own understanding. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to drink from a waterfall, but she forced herself to remain focused. As the memories continued to flow through her, Sarah began to understand the true nature of her power. She wasn't just someone who could manipulate the elements or heal the sick. She was a bridge between the human world and the realm of pure elemental force, a conduit through which the power of creation itself could flow. But with that understanding came a terrible responsibility. She saw the damage that could be done when such power was misused, the civilizations that had fallen when guardians had succumbed to pride or fear. The weight of centuries of mistakes and triumphs pressed down upon her, and for a moment, she felt as though she might be crushed beneath it. "You're not alone," a voice said, and Sarah realized it was her mother, speaking to her across the years. "We are all here with you, guiding you, supporting you. Draw on our strength when your own fails." The final memory that came to her was of the prophecy that had guided her family for generations. She saw it written in letters of fire across the darkness of her mind. "When shadow rises and light grows dim, when the barriers weaken and hope grows thin, the last of the line shall take her place, to stand against the darkness and save the human race, born of sacrifice and nurtured by love. She'll draw her power from the realms above. But the choice is hers, and hers alone, to embrace her destiny or leave it unknown." As the visions faded, Sarah found herself back in the tower chamber, but she was forever changed. The knowledge of her ancestors now lived within her, their abilities had become her own, and their purpose had become her mission. Thomas was kneeling beside her, his face etched with concern. "Sarah, you've been standing there for hours. We were starting to worry." Hours? It had felt like mere minutes, but Sarah could see that the sun had moved significantly across the sky. Her body ached as if she had been engaged in intense physical activity, and her mind felt expanded, filled with new understanding. "I remember," she said, her voice carrying a new strength and certainty. "I remember everything." Lyra nodded approvingly. "The crystal has awakened your true potential. You are now what your parents were, what your ancestors were before them. You are a guardian of Millbrook, protector of the balance between worlds." Sarah stood, and Thomas stepped back in amazement. There was something different about her now, an aura of power and purpose that hadn't been there before. Her eyes seemed to hold depths that spoke of ancient wisdom, and when she moved, it was with the confidence of someone who finally understood their place in the world. "Malachar," she said, testing the name. "I can feel him pressing against the barriers. The binding spell is weakening faster than we thought." "Yes," Lyra confirmed. "We have perhaps one day before it fails completely. You must be ready." Sarah nodded, her mind already working through the strategies and techniques she had inherited from her ancestors. I'll need to strengthen the barriers around the town, prepare the people for what's coming. And I'll need to confront Malakar directly. The confrontation is inevitable, Liar agreed. But remember, you don't have to face it alone. Your parents tried to fight the darkness by themselves, and though they succeeded in delaying it, the cost was too high. You have allies now, people who believe in you. She gestured toward Thomas, who was still staring at Sarah with a mixture of awe and determination. Thomas has already proven his loyalty. There will be others. Thomas stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear Sarah could see in his eyes. Whatever you need, Sarah, I'm with you. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude and affection for her childhood friend. Thank you, Thomas. But I have to warn you, what's coming will be unlike anything you've ever experienced. Malakar isn't just a threat to Millbrook, he's a threat to the very fabric of reality itself. Then we'd better get started, Thomas replied with a grim smile. What do you need me to do? Sarah looked around the chamber one last time, taking in the accumulated wisdom of generations. Then she turned toward the stairs, her purpose clear. First, we need to warn the town. The people have a right to know what's coming, even if they don't remember the old ways. And then we need to prepare for war. As they descended the spiral staircase, Sarah felt the weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders. The carefree days of her youth were over, replaced by a responsibility that would shape the rest of her life. But she no longer felt afraid. She had the knowledge and power of her ancestors, the support of her friends, and the love of parents who had sacrificed everything to give her this chance. The battle for Millbrook, and perhaps for the world itself, was about to begin. The townspeople of Millbrook gathered in the square as the sun reached its zenith, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and concern. Word had spread quickly through the small community that Sarah was calling for an emergency meeting, and despite the strange events of recent days, most had come to listen. Sarah stood near the fountain, her transformation evident to all who looked upon her. Gone was the uncertain young woman who had lived quietly on the outskirts of town. In her place stood someone who radiated confidence and purpose, someone who had finally embraced her true nature. Friends and neighbors, she began, her voice carrying easily across the square. I know many of you have questions about what's been happening lately. The strange behavior of the animals, the unusual lights, the sense that something is changing. In our peaceful town, Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who had first spotted the lights in the tower, stepped forward. Sarah, dear, we've all noticed you seem different today. There's something about you that's changed. Sarah nodded, grateful for the opening. You're right, Mrs. Henderson. I have changed, because I've learned the truth about who I am and what's coming. The truth about all of us. She gestured toward the buildings around them, the familiar streets and homes that had formed the backdrop of their lives. 25 years ago, this town was a very different place. We were connected to forces and traditions that went back centuries. We had guardians who protected us from dangers that most of the world never knew existed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed recognition, as if long-buried memories were beginning to stir. Others displayed skepticism or confusion. Magic isn't real, Sarah, called out Mr. Patterson, the town's blacksmith. Those are just old stories meant to frighten children. In response, Sarah raised her hand, and every flower in the square began to bloom simultaneously, their petals unfurling in a spectacular display of color and life. The fountain's water rose into the air, forming intricate patterns that danced in the sunlight before settling back into the basin. The crowd fell silent, stunned by the undeniable evidence of Sarah's abilities. The stories are true, she continued, her voice gentle but firm. And 25 years ago, my parents sacrificed their lives to protect all of you from something terrible. They cast a spell that made you forget the old ways, forget the dangers that lurked in the shadows. But that spell is failing, and the darkness is returning. Thomas stepped forward to stand beside her, his presence lending credibility to her words. I've seen it myself. The tower, the books, the crystal, everything Sarah is telling you is real. Dr. Morrison, the town's physician, pushed his way through the crowd. Even if what you're saying is true, Sarah, what does it mean for us? What are we supposed to do? Sarah's expression grew grave. It means that very soon, we're going to face a threat called Malakar. It's an ancient evil that feeds on chaos and destruction, and it's been waiting 25 years for its chance to break through into our world. the crowd began to murmur with fear and concern. Some people started to edge away, as if distance might protect them from the reality of what they were hearing. But Sarah continued, raising her voice to regain their attention. We're not defenseless. I've inherited the power and knowledge of my ancestors, and I'm prepared to stand against this darkness. But I can't do it alone. I need all of you to work together, to trust in each other and in the strength of our community. Liara appeared at the edge of the square, her presence causing several people to gasp in recognition. She moved through the crowd with fluid grace, her ancient eyes taking in the faces around her. The young guardian speaks truly, Liara said, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone listen. I have walked this world for many centuries, and I have seen the devastation that Malachar can bring, but I have also seen the power of unity, the strength that comes when people choose to stand together against the darkness. Mayor Whitman, a portly man who had governed the town for the past decade, stepped forward nervously. What exactly are you asking us to do? We're just ordinary people. We're not warriors or wizards. You're more than you know, Sarah replied. The spell that made you forget also suppressed abilities that many of you possess. Some of you have healing gifts, others can communicate with nature, still others have the power to strengthen and protect. As the barriers continue to weaken, those abilities will return. To demonstrate her point, Sarah walked over to young Emma Collins, who had been born with a withered arm. Placing her hands gently on the girl's shoulder, Sarah channeled healing energy through her touch. The crowd watched in amazement as Emma's arms straightened and strengthened, becoming whole for the first time in her life. Each of you has something to contribute, Sarah continued. Your courage, your knowledge, your willingness to stand together. That's what will make the difference. The crowd was buzzing with excitement and fear, but Sarah could see that many were beginning to believe. The evidence was undeniable, and the sense of purpose she projected was infectious. What do we need to do? Asked Father Mackenzie, the town's priest. How do we prepare for something like this? Sarah smiled, grateful for his support. First, we need to establish protective barriers around the town. I'll need volunteers to help me gather materials and set up the necessary defenses. Second, we need to prepare food and supplies for what might be a prolonged siege. And third, we need to organize ourselves into groups based on our abilities and skills. She looked around the square, meeting the eyes of as many townspeople as possible. I won't lie to you. What's coming will be dangerous, and I can't guarantee that we'll all survive. But I can promise you this: if we stand together, if we trust in each other and in the power of our community, we have a chance to not just survive, but to triumph. The crowd was silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what they were being asked to do. Then, slowly, people began to step forward, volunteering their help and expressing their commitment to the cause. Mrs. Henderson was the first. I may be old, but I'm not ready to let some ancient evil destroy the town I've lived in for 70 years. What do you need me to do? Dr. Morrison nodded grimly. I'll set up a medical station and start treating anyone who needs healing. If people's abilities are returning, some might need help managing the transition. One by one, the townspeople stepped forward, offering their skills and their courage. The blacksmith promised to forge weapons and tools, the farmers offered to provide food and supplies, and the shopkeepers volunteered to coordinate the distribution of resources. As Sarah watched the community come together, she felt a surge of hope. This was what her parents had died to protect, not just the buildings and streets of Millbrook, but the spirit of the people who called it home. But even as the crowd dispersed to begin their preparations, Sarah could feel the darkness pressing closer. The barriers that had held Malachar at bay were weakening with each passing hour, and she knew that their time was running out. Liara, she said, turning to the ancient woman, how long do we have? Liara's expression was grave. The final barrier will fall with the setting of tomorrow's sun. Malachar will come with the darkness, and when he does, you must be ready to face him. Sarah nodded, her resolve strengthening. Then we'd better get to work. The people of Millbrook are counting on us, and I won't let them down. As the afternoon wore on, the town transformed into a hive of activity. People who had never believed in magic found themselves helping to carve protective symbols into stone, while others discovered latent abilities they never knew they possessed. The sense of purpose that had taken hold of the community was remarkable, and Sarah found herself feeling proud of the people she had grown up among. But she also knew that the real test was still to come. When Malachar finally broke through, when the full force of his malevolent power was unleashed upon their small town? Would their newfound unity and determination be enough to stand against such ancient evil? Only time would tell, but Sarah was determined to give everything she had to protect the people she loved. The legacy of her parents, the wisdom of her ancestors, and the power that flowed through her very being, all of it would be brought to bear in the battle to come. The fate of Millbrook, and perhaps the entire world, hung in the balance. The hours that followed Sarah's revelation passed in a blur of frantic activity. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across Millbrook, the transformation of the quiet town was nothing short of extraordinary. What had been a peaceful community of farmers, merchants, and craftspeople had become something resembling a medieval fortress preparing for siege. Sarah stood atop the bell tower of the old church, surveying the preparations below. From her vantage point, she could see the protective barriers taking shape around the town's perimeter. The symbols her ancestors had used for centuries were being carved into stones and wooden posts, each one glowing faintly with accumulated power as the townspeople worked under Lyara's careful guidance. The eastern barrier is nearly complete, Thomas called up to her from the street below. He had taken on the role of coordinating the various work groups, his natural leadership abilities proving invaluable in organizing the community's efforts. Sarah nodded, her enhanced senses allowing her to perceive the growing network of protective energy that surrounded Millbrook. It was impressive work, especially considering that most of the townspeople had only learned of their magical heritage a few hours earlier. But she could also sense the weakening of the ancient binding spell that had kept Malachar imprisoned for so long. The darkness was pressing against the barriers with increasing intensity, and she knew they had precious little time left. Sarah, Dr. Morrison's voice reached her from the town square. "We need you down here. Something's happening to some of the volunteers," concern gripping her heart. Sarah quickly descended from the tower and made her way through the bustling streets. The scene that greeted her in the square was both inspiring and troubling. Several townspeople were displaying abilities that went far beyond what she had expected, but some were clearly struggling to control their newfound powers. Mrs. Henderson was sitting on a bench near the fountain, her weathered hands glowing with soft white light. Around her, wilted flowers were springing back to life, their petals unfurling in vibrant displays of color. But the elderly woman's face was pale with exhaustion, and her breathing was labored. "I don't understand what's happening to me," she whispered as Sarah knelt beside her. "I touched those dying roses, and suddenly I could feel their pain. I had to help them, but now I feel so tired." Sarah placed a gentle hand on Mrs. Henderson's shoulder, using her own energy to stabilize the older woman's life force. "You're a natural healer, Mrs. Henderson. It's a gift that's been dormant in your family line for generations. But you need to learn to control it, or it will drain your strength completely." A few yards away, young Billy Thompson was having a different kind of problem. The 12-year-old boy was standing in the middle of a circle of floating stones, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The rocks were orbiting around him in an increasingly rapid pattern, and several people had backed away in concern. "I can't make them stop," Billy cried out. "I was just trying to help move the stones for the barrier, and they started floating by themselves." Sarah approached the boy slowly, her voice calm and reassuring. "Billy, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're not in danger, and neither is anyone else. This is a gift, not a curse, but you need to learn to breathe and focus your thoughts." She guided the frightened child through a series of breathing exercises, teaching him to visualize his power as a stream of water that he could direct and control. Gradually, the stones began to slow their frantic orbiting, finally settling gently to the ground. "There," Sarah said, smiling at the boy's look of wonder. "You're an Earth Shepa, Billy. With practice, you'll be able to move mountains if you want to." Dr. Morrison approached with a list in his hand. "We've had 17 people manifest abilities in the last 2 hours. Most are managing well, but a few are having difficulties similar to what we just saw." Sarah scanned the list, recognizing the names of people she had known her entire life. Farmers were displaying an affinity for plant growth and animal communication. The blacksmith had developed an immunity to fire and the ability to shape metal with his bare hands. Even Father Mackenzie was showing signs of enhanced empathic abilities, allowing him to sense the emotional states of his parishioners. "It's happening faster than I expected," Sarah murmured. "The weakening of the binding spell is accelerating the awakening of dormant abilities throughout the town." Lyara peered at her side, her ancient eyes showing concern. This is both a blessing and a complication. The people will be stronger when Malakar arrives, but they're also more vulnerable right now. Untrained power can be as dangerous as having no power at all. Sarah nodded grimly. We need to organize training sessions, even if they're brief. People need to understand at least the basics of controlling their abilities before the battle begins. Over the next several hours, Sarah and Lyara worked tirelessly to help the townspeople understand and manage their emerging powers. They divided the population into groups based on their abilities: healers, elementalists, empaths, and those who showed aptitude for protective magic. Each group received crash courses in the fundamentals of their respective gifts. The healing group, led by Dr. Morrison and assisted by Mrs. Henderson, learned to draw energy from the earth itself rather than depleting their own life force. The elementalists, including Billy, and several of the farmers, practiced moving small objects and manipulating the basic forces of nature. The empaths, guided by Father Mackenzie, learned to shield their minds from overwhelming emotional input while using their abilities to coordinate group efforts. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah called another town meeting. The people who gathered in the square were visibly different from those who had assembled that morning. There was a sense of confidence and purpose that hadn't been there before, but also an underlying tension as everyone felt the approaching darkness. The barriers are complete, Sarah announced, her voice carrying clearly through the evening air. The protective symbols are in place, and everyone who has manifested abilities has received at least basic training. You've all done incredible work today. She paused, looking around at the faces of her friends and neighbors. But I need to be honest with you about what we're facing. Malakar isn't just a powerful enemy, he's a force of pure malevolence that has existed since the dawn of time. He feeds on fear, hatred, and despair, and he'll try to turn us against each other. Mayor Whitman stepped forward, his usual nervousness replaced by grim determination. What exactly should we expect when he arrives? Sarah exchanged a glance with Lyara before answering. He'll come with the full darkness of night, probably accompanied by creatures of shadow and corruption. He'll try to breach our barriers through both physical and psychological attacks. Some of you may see visions of your worst fears, or hear voices trying to convince you to give up. Thomas, who had been standing near the fountain, raised his voice. And if the barriers fail, what then? Then we fight, Sarah replied simply, not with swords or conventional weapons, but with the power of our unity and the strength of our community. Malakar's greatest weakness is that he can't understand the bonds between people who truly care for each other. That's what defeated him before, and it's what will defeat him again. Father Mackenzie stepped forward, his weathered face showing both fear and faith. Should we prepare for the possibility that some of us might not survive this? The question hung in the air like a weight, and Sarah felt the mood of the crowd shift. These weren't soldiers or trained warriors, they were ordinary people who had been thrust into extraordinary circumstances. I won't lie to you, Sarah said quietly. There are risks, and I can't guarantee everyone's safety, but I can promise you this: if we stand together, if we trust in each other and in the power that flows through all of us, we have a real chance not just to survive, but to end this threat once and for all. She looked around the square one more time, memorizing the faces of the people who had become her responsibility. Those of you who have children should take them to the church basement. Mrs. Patterson has volunteered to watch over them during the battle. Everyone else, take your positions along the barriers. Remember your training, trust your instincts, and above all, don't let fear control you. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah felt a familiar presence beside her. Lyara had remained silent during the meeting, but now she placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. You've done well, child. Your parents would be proud of the leader you've become. Sarah smiled sadly. I just hope it's enough. I can feel him out there, pressing against the barriers. He's so much stronger than I imagined. Strength isn't always about raw power, Lyara reminded her. Sometimes it's about knowing when to yield, when to adapt, and when to sacrifice for the greater good. You have wisdom beyond your years, Sarah. Trust in that wisdom when the time comes. As the last light of day faded from the sky, Sarah made her way to the northern edge of town, where the main barrier faced the dark forest from which Malakar would likely emerge. The protective symbols carved into the stone posts were glowing brightly now, forming a wall of light that stretched across the town's perimeter. Thomas joined her, along with several of the other townspeople who had volunteered to stand guard at the primary entry point. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. "Do you think we're ready?" Thomas asked quietly. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think we're as ready as we can be, but Malachar has had 25 years to plan his return. He'll have new strategies, new ways of attacking us that we haven't anticipated." A cold wind began to blow from the forest, carrying with it the scent of decay and corruption. The temperature dropped noticeably, and several of the townspeople shivered despite their warm clothing. "He's coming," Sarah whispered, her enhanced senses picking up the approaching malevolence. "Everyone, prepare yourselves. Remember what you've learned, and whatever happens, don't let him separate us." In the distance, the darkness between the trees seemed to deepen and writhe, as if the very shadows were alive and hungry. The barrier's glow intensified in response, and Sarah could feel the ancient magic of her ancestors stirring within her. The final battle for Millbrook was about to begin. The attack came not with a thunderous roar or dramatic display of power, but with a whisper that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. At first, Sarah thought it was simply the wind moving through the trees, but as she listened more carefully, she realized that the sound was forming words of doubt, fear, and despair. "You cannot win," the voice murmured, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Your parents thought they could defeat me, and look what became of them. You are alone, child, and you will fail as they failed." Sarah felt the words trying to worm their way into her mind, seeking to plant seeds of uncertainty and terror. But the wisdom of her ancestors rose up to meet the attack, and she recognized it for what it was: a psychological assault designed to weaken their resolve before the physical confrontation began. "He's trying to get into our heads," she called out to the townspeople stationed along the barrier. "Don't listen to the voice. Focus on the light of the protective symbols. Remember who you are and why you're fighting." But even as she spoke, Sarah could see that some of the defenders were struggling. Mrs. Henderson was pressing her hands to her ears, her face twisted with pain. Billy Thompson was backing away from his position, his eyes wide with terror at something only he could see. "I can see them," Billy whispered. "The monsters in the forest. They're coming for us, and they're hungry." Sarah quickly moved to the boy's side, placing her hands on his shoulders and channeling calming energy into his panicked mind. "Billy, there are no monsters yet. What you're seeing is an illusion, designed to make you afraid. Look at me, not at the forest." The boy's eyes focused on her face, and gradually the terror began to recede. "But I saw them, Sarah. They looked so real." "That's because Malachar is very good at making illusions seem real," Sarah explained. "But you have something he doesn't understand: the strength that comes from being part of a community. Draw on that strength, Billy. Remember that you're not alone." As she helped the boy regain his composure, Sarah became aware of a new development. The darkness between the trees was beginning to move, flowing like liquid shadow toward the barrier. It wasn't quite solid, but it wasn't entirely insubstantial either. It was something that existed in the spaces between reality, feeding on the fears and doubts of living beings. "Lyara," Sarah called out. "Is this how he appeared before?" The ancient woman shook her head grimly. "No. This is something new. 25 years of imprisonment have changed him, made him more cunning and more patient. He's not rushing into a direct confrontation this time." The shadow stuff reached the barrier and began to press against it, testing its strength. Where it touched the protective symbols, sparks of light flared and the darkness recoiled momentarily. But Sarah could see that the assault was methodical and persistent, probing for weaknesses in their defenses. "He's looking for a way in," she murmured. "The barriers are holding, but he's testing every inch of them." Dr. Morrison, who was stationed at the eastern checkpoint, suddenly called out in alarm. "Sarah, something's happening over here. The shadows are moving differently, almost like they're alive." Sarah quickly made her way to the eastern barrier, where she found a troubling sight. The darkness that had been pressing against the protective symbols was beginning to take shape, forming grotesque figures that seemed to be made of living nightmare. They had the general form of humans, but their features were distorted and their eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence. "Shadow servants," Lyara said, appearing at Sarah's side. "He's creating them from the fears and negative emotions of the townspeople. The more afraid we become, the stronger they grow." As if summoned by her words, more of the shadow figures began to materialize along the entire perimeter of the town. They pressed against the barriers with increasing intensity, their touch causing the protective symbols to flicker and dim. The barriers are weakening, Sarah observed with growing concern. We need to reinforce them, but I can't be everywhere at once. Then don't try to be, Thomas said, moving to stand beside her. You've trained us for this. Let us help. Around the perimeter, the townspeople began to work together to strengthen the barriers. The healers channeled energy into the protective symbols, while the elementalists used their abilities to create additional layers of defense. The empaths worked to maintain the emotional stability of the group, countering the fear-inducing effects of Malakar's psychological attacks. For a moment, it seemed like their coordinated efforts might be enough to hold back the assault. The shadow servants were pushed back from the barriers, and the protective symbols blazed with renewed intensity. But then Malakar himself appeared. He didn't emerge from the forest like Sarah had expected. Instead, he simply materialized in the space between the tree line and the barrier, as if he had been there all along and had only just chosen to become visible. He was tall and imposing, with features that seemed to shift and change in the flickering light of the protective symbols. His eyes were voids of absolute darkness, and his voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of centuries. "Hello, young guardian," he said, his tone conversational and almost friendly. "You've grown strong since last we met. Your parents would be proud." Sarah felt a surge of anger at the casual way he mentioned her parents, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I wasn't there when you killed them, Malakar, but I'm here now, and I'm not going to let you destroy what they died to protect." The ancient entity chuckled, a sound like wind through a graveyard. "Killed them? Oh, child, you misunderstand. I didn't kill your parents. They killed themselves, pouring their life force into that binding spell. I simply watched and waited for the barriers to weaken." He gestured toward the protective symbols, which were indeed beginning to flicker more rapidly under the assault of his shadow servants. "And now, after 25 years of patience, I'm finally free to finish what I started. The question is, will you force me to destroy your entire town, or will you simply step aside and let me pass?" "What do you want?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "What I've always wanted," Malakar replied. "To break down the barriers between worlds, to bring chaos and transformation to a reality that has grown stagnant and predictable. Your little town sits on a nexus point, a place where the fabric of reality is thin. Once I control it, I can spread my influence across the entire realm." Sarah felt the weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders. This was the moment her entire life had been building toward, the purpose for which she had been born and trained. "And if I refuse, then I'll take what I want anyway," Malakar said with a shrug. "But it will be much more unpleasant for everyone involved. Your friends and neighbors will suffer before they die, and their fear will only make me stronger." The shadow servants pressed harder against the barriers, and Sarah could see cracks beginning to appear in some of the protective symbols. The townspeople were holding their positions, but she could sense their growing exhaustion and fear. "You're afraid," Malakar observed, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality. "I can feel it radiating from you like heat from a fire. You're afraid that you're not strong enough, that you'll fail as your parents failed. You're afraid that everyone you care about will die because of your inadequacy." Sarah felt the words hitting her like physical blows, each one designed to find the deepest insecurities in her heart. For a moment, she wavered, feeling the weight of responsibility threatening to crush her spirit. But then she remembered something her mother had said in the vision from the crystal. "We are all here with you, guiding you, supporting you. Draw on our strength when your own fails." Taking a deep breath, Sarah reached out with her mind, connecting with the network of power that flowed through her ancestors. She felt their presence surrounding her, their love and support filling the empty spaces that fear had tried to claim. "You're right," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I am afraid, but fear isn't weakness, it's proof that I have something worth fighting for." "You feed on fear, Malakar, but you don't understand it. You don't understand that fear can make people stronger, that it can unite them in ways that power alone never could." She gestured toward the townspeople who were maintaining the barriers despite their exhaustion and terror. "Look at them. They're farmers and shopkeepers and craftspeople. They have every reason to be afraid, but they're still here, still fighting. That's not weakness, that's courage." Malakar's expression darkened, and for the first time, Sarah saw uncertainty in his ancient eyes. "Courage is an illusion, child. It's simply ignorance of the true nature of reality. When people understand how powerless they really are, courage crumbles like dust. Then let me show you the true nature of reality, Sarah replied. She raised her hands, and the protective barriers around Millbrook blazed with light so intense that it turned night into day. But more than that, she opened her mind to the townspeople, sharing with them the wisdom and power she had inherited from her ancestors. Suddenly, every person defending the barriers felt the presence of generations of guardians supporting them. They experienced the love and sacrifice of Sarah's parents, the determination of her great-grandmother, and the unshakable faith of countless others who had stood against the darkness. The shadow servants shrieked as the enhanced barriers burned them away like mist before the sun. Even Malachar staggered backward, his form becoming less solid as the combined will of an entire community focused against him. This is impossible, he snarled, his voice losing its hypnotic quality and becoming harsh and guttural. You're just one guardian, and a young one at that. You can't channel the power of an entire bloodline. I'm not just one guardian, Sarah replied, her voice echoing with the voices of her ancestors. I'm part of something much larger. We all are. That's what you've never understood, Malachar. Power isn't about domination or control. It's about connection, about the bonds that tie us together. The ancient entity's form began to waver, and Sarah realized that this was her moment. The townspeople's faith in her, combined with the power of her heritage, had given her the strength she needed to strike the decisive blow. But as she prepared to channel everything she had into a final attack, Malachar smiled, an expression so filled with malevolence that it made her blood run cold. You think you've won? He laughed. This has all been a distraction, child. While you've been focused on protecting your little town, I've been preparing something much more significant. He raised his hand, and in the distance, Sarah could see lights beginning to appear on the horizon. But these weren't the warm lights of human habitation, they were cold, blue flames that spoke of corruption and decay. I've been awakening my servants across the realm, Malachar continued. In 25 years, I've had time to plant seeds of darkness in 100 different communities. Your victory here is meaningless if the rest of the world falls into chaos. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized the true scope of Malachar's plan. He hadn't been trying to break through the barriers around Millbrook, he had been buying time for his influence to spread to other nexus points across the realm. But don't worry, Malachar added with mock sympathy. I'll make sure your town is the last to fall. You can watch as everything you've fought to protect crumbles around you. The ancient entity began to fade, his form becoming translucent as he prepared to depart. Until we meet again, young guardian, try not to despair too much when you see what I've accomplished. As Malachar vanished into the night, Sarah felt the weight of a much larger responsibility settling upon her shoulders. The battle for Millbrook had been won, but the war for the fate of the entire realm was just beginning. In the aftermath of Malachar's departure, an eerie silence settled over Millbrook. The shadow servants had dissipated with their master's withdrawal, and the protective barriers no longer blazed with urgent intensity. But the townspeople remained at their posts, sensing that something fundamental had changed in the nature of their situation. Sarah stood in the town square, her mind racing as she tried to process the implications of what Malachar had revealed. The cold blue lights on the horizon were growing brighter, and she could feel disturbances in the fabric of reality at multiple points across the realm. The ancient entity hadn't been lying, he had indeed been preparing for this moment for 25 years. Sarah, Thomas approached cautiously, his face showing the exhaustion that all of them felt after the intense confrontation. What did he mean about other communities? About planting seeds of darkness? Before Sarah could answer, Lyra appeared beside them, her ancient features grave with concern. He means that Millbrook was never his true target. It was a test, a way to measure your strength and prepare for the larger conflict to come. Dr. Morrison joined the group, still breathing heavily from the effort of maintaining the barriers. Are you saying that what we just went through was just a preliminary battle? I'm afraid so, Sarah replied, her voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. Those lights on the horizon, they're other nexus points, places where the barriers between worlds are thin. Malachar has been corrupting them slowly, turning them into gateways for his influence. Mayor Whitman, who had been coordinating the civilian evacuation during the battle, hurried over to them. Sarah, we're receiving reports from the neighboring towns. Strange things are happening everywhere, livestock dying, crops failing, and people reporting nightmares that seem more real than dreams. Sarah closed her eyes, extending her enhanced senses beyond the borders of Millbrook. What she felt made her stomach clench with fear. The corruption was spreading like a disease, moving from one community to another in a pattern that suggested careful planning and coordination. How many nexus points are there? She asked Lyara. The ancient woman's expression was grim. Across the entire realm? Dozens, perhaps hundreds. But there are 7 primary nodes, places where the concentration of power is so great that controlling them would give Malachar the ability to reshape reality itself. And how many of those has he already claimed? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Based on what I can sense, at least 3, possibly 4. The corruption is strongest in the eastern provinces, where the old bloodlines were nearly wiped out during the Great Wars a century ago. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What happens if he gains control of all 7? Then the barriers between worlds will collapse entirely, Lyara replied. Creatures of chaos and shadow will pour into the realm, and the natural order that has maintained the balance for millennia will be destroyed. The group fell silent as the full scope of the crisis became clear. They had won a single battle, but the war was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. We need to warn the other Guardian bloodlines, Sarah said, her mind already working through the strategic implications. If there are other communities with the knowledge and power to resist Malachar's influence, we need to coordinate our efforts. That's assuming there are other Guardian bloodlines still active, Thomas pointed out. You said yourself that the old knowledge was largely forgotten. Lyara nodded slowly. The young man is right to be concerned. The Guardian tradition was nearly destroyed during the Great Purges centuries ago. Most of the surviving bloodlines went into hiding, their knowledge preserved in secret, but their power dormant. But the corruption spreading across the realm should be awakening those dormant abilities, Sarah reasoned. Just as it did here in Millbrook. People with Guardian heritage should be manifesting powers even if they don't understand what's happening. To them, that's possible, Lyara agreed. But untrained Guardians are as likely to be corrupted by Malachar's influence as they are to resist it. Power without wisdom is dangerous, especially when confronted with an entity as cunning as our enemy. Sarah looked around at the townspeople who had fought so bravely to defend their home. They were ordinary people who had discovered extraordinary abilities, but they were also tired, frightened, and completely unprepared for a conflict on the scale that was now unfolding. We can't do this alone, she said finally. We need allies, trained fighters, and most importantly, we need information about Malachar's plans and capabilities. I might be able to help with that, said a new voice from the shadows at the edge of the square. Everyone turned to see a figure emerging from the darkness, a tall man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. He wore robes that seemed to shift color in the moonlight, and there was an aura of power about him that made even Sarah take a step back. Who are you? Sarah demanded, her hand instinctively moving to the protective amulet at her throat. The stranger smiled, and there was something familiar about his expression. My name is Aldrich Stormwind, and I represent the Council of Shadows, the remnants of the old Guardian orders that have survived in secret for the past 2 centuries. Lyara's eyes widened in recognition. Aldrich? But you died in the siege of Ravenshallow 40 years ago. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Aldrich replied with a slight bow. Though I must admit, I've been keeping a very low profile since then. The Council has been watching the situation develop, and we've been preparing for this day. Sarah studied the newcomer carefully, her enhanced senses probing for any sign of deception or corruption. What she found was a complex network of protective spells and mental barriers that spoke of decades of careful training and preparation. You said you could help with information, she said. What do you know about Malachar's plans? Aldrich's expression grew serious. More than we'd like, and less than we need. The Council has been tracking his influence for years, documenting the spread of corruption and identifying potential nexus points. We know that he's targeting the 7 primary nodes, but we don't know the exact sequence of his attacks or the specific methods he's using. What about the other Guardian bloodlines? Thomas asked. Are there others like Sarah who could help? In this fight, there are perhaps 12 confirmed active Guardians across the realm, Aldrich replied, but they're scattered, and most of them are dealing with their own local crises. Malachar has been very careful to keep us isolated from each other. Sarah felt a surge of determination. Then we need to change that. We need to find ways to communicate with the other guardians, to coordinate our efforts and share information. That's precisely why I'm here, Aldrich said. The council has maintained a network of communication crystals that allow near instantaneous contact across vast distances. We'd like to offer Millbrook access to that network. He reached into his robes and produced a crystal similar to the one in the tower, but smaller and more portable. This will allow you to contact the other active guardians, as well as access the council's accumulated knowledge about Malachar and his methods. Sarah accepted the crystal, feeling its power resonating with her own abilities. What does the council want in return? Your help in coordinating the resistance, Aldrich replied. You've proven yourself capable of not only defending against Malachar's attacks, but also of training others to use their abilities effectively. The council believes that you could be the key to uniting the scattered guardian bloodlines. The weight of this new responsibility settled upon Sarah's shoulders, but she found that she was no longer daunted by it. The events of the past few days had shown her that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, and more importantly, that she wasn't alone in this fight. What would this coordination involve? She asked. Aldrich gestured toward the horizon, where the cold blue lights were still visible. First, we need to prevent Malachar from claiming any more nexus points. That means sending guardian teams to the remaining unconquered nodes and establishing defenses similar to what you've created here. And after that, we take the fight to him. The council has been researching methods to permanently banish entities like Malachar from our realm. It's dangerous work, and it will require the combined power of multiple guardians, but we believe it's possible. Sarah looked around at the faces of her friends and neighbors, seeing the same determination in their eyes that she felt in her own heart. They had already sacrificed so much to defend their home, and now they were being asked to help save the entire realm. Before we make any decisions, she said, I need to consult with my community. They've earned the right to have a voice in what happens next. Aldrich nodded approvingly. Spoken like a true guardian. The council will await your answer, but please don't take too long. Every hour we delay gives Malachar more time to consolidate his power. As the stranger melted back into the shadows, Sarah gathered the townspeople together for what she knew would be one of the most important meetings in Millbrook's history. The battle for their town was over, but the war for the fate of the realm was just beginning. The question now was whether the people of Millbrook were ready to become part of something much larger than themselves, a coalition of heroes fighting against an ancient evil that threatened to destroy everything they held dear. Looking at the faces around her, Sarah had a feeling she already knew the answer. Mrs. Henderson was the first to speak, her voice carrying the authority of her years. Sarah, dear, I've lived in this town for 70 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened here tonight. If there are other communities facing the same threat, then I think we have a responsibility to help them. Dr. Morrison nodded. In agreement. The Hippocratic Oath says do no harm, but sometimes the best way to avoid harm is to take action against those who would cause it. One by one, the townspeople voiced their support for joining the wider resistance. They had discovered strengths they never knew they possessed, and they were determined to use those strengths to protect not just their own community, but all the innocent people who were threatened by Malachar's spreading corruption. As the meeting concluded and the townspeople began to disperse to their homes, Sarah felt a sense of hope that she hadn't experienced since the crisis began. They had won their first battle, they had gained powerful allies, and most importantly, they had proven that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they stood together. The war against Malachar would be long and difficult, but Sarah was beginning to believe that they actually had a chance to win it. The darkness had spread far, but the light of courage and unity was spreading too, and in the end, that might be enough to tip the balance. The fate of the realm hung in the balance, but for the first time since this all began, Sarah felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The guardian bloodlines were awakening, the resistance was forming, and the final battle between light and darkness was about to begin. The story of Millbrook had become part of a much larger tale, and Sarah knew that she and her community would play a crucial role in determining how that tale would end. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.